Hello, it's Susie Walker here from Psychologies magazine. I am delighted to be joined by Pragya Agarwal, who has written a brilliant book called Sway, which is Unravelling Unconscious Bias. So I'm delighted to be talking with you today. Lovely to see you. But you're not just an author, but you're a behavioural scientist, aren't you? A journalist as well as an author. So I'm really glad we've got some expertise here and some science looking at this very important issue right now. Tell us, first of all, what is unconscious bias?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for having me here. It's great.
Lovely to see you.
We talk a lot about unconscious bias, and I think that before I wrote the book, there was so much buzz around it. People were mentioning it in all the articles and everything, and I just worried that it's become there's a danger that it can become a real fluff word, and people don't really understand. So I wanted to approach it very scientifically. Um, and unconscious bias are these biases or shortcuts in our brain that we are not sometimes aware of, but they affect the way we process information and we make decisions and we assess and evaluate other people. So when a lot of information is coming into our brain, we can't process it at the same rate in a very rational manner, especially when we are tired or distracted. So we fall back on these kind of shortcuts or these templates that are in our brain. And so when that happens, those are the biases that we carry from the way we've been brought up, the way things we've seen, the way we read things in media, and all those affect how we form a sense of our identity, but other people's identities as well.
Yeah, and again, because it's unconscious, sometimes it's really hard to see. So
Mm.
what can we do about it? What's the first step to kind of challenging that, or even just becoming aware of it? Because if you don't know about it, it's unconscious. So how do we even start to dig?
Yeah, I think sometimes we are aware of it and we don't want to say it because obviously we all want to be fair minded. We might be implicit aware that I don't like this kind of behavior or I don't like this kind of thing. And that can affect, but we are not aware how that might affect our interaction with other people. So, for instance, if people are hiring, they might say, I'm very fair minded. I'm going to judge all the CVs on a very objective manner. But those kind of biases can affect how we see somebody or weigh up different people's qualifications. So I think first is being aware and recognizing that all of us are biased. I think people get very defensive about it. And through this book, what I really wanted to say is that I am biased and so are you. We all carry these biases. And we can do that and reflect on that and educate ourselves in a very non-judgmental way. I'm not standing here and preaching. I'm not standing here and saying, oh, you are biased, so you're a really bad person. Biases are not just for people who are racist or sexist or bigoted, but we all carry these biases. I think that is really the first step, to just really acknowledge them. And then as we start reading and educating ourselves, we start noticing how these are affecting our everyday actions and decisions. Also, we talk about diversifying. So, stepping outside our echo chambers. I think social media, we want to be in our comfort zones. There's a confirmation bias, affinity bias. We like people who are like us, who look like us. And so I think just stepping outside that and trying to expose ourselves to diverse views, diverse reading, diverse books actively can be really useful as well.
Sure, because in the book you talk about sort of hindsight bias, conformity bias, status bias, negativity bias. Can you talk us through a few of those? So what's hindsight? I didn't know what that was. Tell me what hindsight bias is.
So hindsight is that sometimes we think that we already knew what happened in the past. So we say we use the cliche like hindsight is a good thing or something. Or when I talk to people, people would say, "Oh, I always knew that this is going to happen," and so, but we don't know that when we are in that situation. But in hindsight, we can weigh up these options more rationally and think, "Oh, actually, I always thought that I knew that this is going to happen." So we kind of biased in that way that we think that we knew that those things were going to happen.
Yeah.
Negativity bias is also that we tend to believe negative information more than the positive information. That's how sometimes fake news and the panic can spread as well, because we are more likely to believe that. We are more likely to judge people negatively if they're outside our group or our tribe and community, rather than, and that is outweighs how we positively weigh people or judge people or evaluate people who are part of a group. So we are always kind of, our brains biased towards the negative information more than the positive information. So that's one of the things.
And is there you talk about the kind of evolutionary bias around this. So again, that feels very, is there anything we do about that, the evolutionary bias? Because that seems to be coming from a very basic place. You do not look like me, you're a threat, I'm going to be triggered. I think I was saying earlier that my bias is often about those kind of white public school boys, and as soon as I hear the accent, that's it. I mean, I'm a girl from the north, single mother, got certain opinions about that, and my bias, I didn't realize how strong it was until fairly recently, and so noticing that. So what can we do about that? I'm not quite sure what that is about around evolution, but more like experience.
No, I think evolutionary, when I discuss in the book, what I wanted to give a background was that in the very, very distant past, our ancestors had to make these really quick decisions about who's part of our group and who's not part of a group, because there were very few resources, and survival is the instinct that we all had. But sometimes that can be used as, media can use it to say, this is hardwired within us. So so that can be used as an excuse. But we don't live in the same situations. We have sometimes more time to assess and evaluate these things. There's not the same kind of resources that we are competing for. But an understanding that sometimes our biases can be triggered by fear and threat can help us evaluate the information that people are giving us. So sometimes politicians can use this by creating fear and threat of outsiders, as we know. And that can trigger our biases and prejudices against people who we consider as outsiders, who consider as a threat to our status, to our privileges, to our position in society, because we are all in these hierarchies. And I think once we realize that and acknowledge that that is happening, we can be more watchful of these instincts or these triggers in our lives.
So what I'm hearing is, so we notice, first of all, the first thing is to acknowledge that we're all biased on some level or another. Then we notice when our bias comes up. And then so you're aware that might be a filter that you might use, that I'm going to judge this person for how they're speaking, and I'm going to have a certain opinion about this, and I'm not even going to hear it because of a certain accent or a certain socio-economic group that kind of, what do they know, that kind of thing. And then what are the questions at that point? So it's almost in the moment trying to question that. What are the questions I need to start asking myself, or in the moment? To me, I might not be able to do that, but I think it feels like I have to start digging in terms of.
I think that's why it's really important to, when we are making important decisions about things, we take our time, because when we are responding to fear, threat, and these templates, we're making very, very quick decisions. And what happens is our amygdala just reacts to the fear and threat rather than the information going to our cortex to be able to process it in a rational manner and weigh up different options. And at that point, I think we just need to take a step back and say, are there any other options that I have in assessing this person? And being aware of it also means that we can be aware if we are imposing certain generalizations on people, saying all white men who speak in this particular accent are going to act like this, or going to have this opinion. And that might hold. I don't say that might not be the case. But just because when we are aware of those generalizations, we start saying, instead of all, we start saying this particular person acts like this. And once we start rewiring that, then our templates start changing, and that we don't subconsciously just automatically fall back on the all men or all white men who speak in this accent, or all people who speak in this accent are going to act like this, and this person who speaks in this accent has acted in this manner. And I think it's a gradual, there's no quick solutions to it, but there's a gradual, slow process that can start happening. And I think that's also important when we're speaking to our children, that we don't use these generalizations like all people who are like this act like this, or all, and just using these generalizations can really impact them, like in terms of all boys love football or all girls love dolls. And I think instead of that, when we're saying this person is acting like this, that can start changing things.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think about it like that as well. Also, from a gender point of view, I mean, of course, bias is quite across, isn't it? But when, as you say, when we're bringing up our children, you know, but again, it goes back, unraveling it goes back to noticing your own biases. You know, I mean, I remember saying to my son at one point, you know, it's a northern phrase, but don't be a big girl's blouse. I mean, and as I said it, I was like, wow, where did that come from? And it's like, okay, so and it's not nice, is it, to acknowledge your own biases? But until we do, then we kind of got nowhere to go. If we're constantly defensive, is there any tips you've got about that piece of it, about not being defensive? Because, as you say, this acknowledgement of we're all biased in some way.
Yeah, I think once we start acknowledging that, we also start focusing on the outcome. So sometimes people say, I didn't mean to be it like that. But that doesn't matter, because our intentionality is important and we can change that. But if we start focusing on the outcome that it has, the action that it results in, I think that can shift our mindset. Because saying, okay, I'm not sexist, or I don't think men are superior than women, but are the words or the language or the actions we're doing, is that resulting in that thing? I think once we start focusing on the outcome, that changes the configuration, and we start focusing less on ourselves and then being defensive about it, and rather thinking, actually this is happening, so I might need to change how I spoke about it, or I might need to change how I think. And it is an uncomfortable process. Nobody wants to believe that we carry any biases. We all think we are really fair-minded. And I think once we acknowledge that, yes, we all might have it, we start really taking steps to do that in a kind of a non-judgmental way.
Yeah. I mean, obviously with the latest challenges at the moment about Black Lives Matters, to be able to, I've had so many conversations about it, but it's this kind of, no one wants to, there's a lot of defensive-ness, to me. And I think, but the part is like, just take a deep breath and look, and just, once you can acknowledge it quietly, then, as you say, the outcome, we want a different outcome, we want a different world. And okay, but I mean, again, I talk about with Psychologies, it's often the inner work starts with one person, with yourself. And then we can create, I mean, that's my belief, but then we start changing society. That's what it feels. Yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
In terms of what are the benefits of having, for example, in business, having a more diverse board, you know what I mean, having women, people of color, what you say, what do we want, but what are the benefits of having a more diverse community, businesses, all of that? What's the payoff for it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's more representative of the society we live in. But then we need to think about, when we have just one kind of people, we're living in these silos, in these kind of echo chambers where the same views are being echoed back at us. We are not thinking about actually assessing that this thing might have an impact when it goes out. And we see so much with brands and businesses, they get the messaging wrong, they get their branding wrong, because they haven't considered how this might impact on people of different color, different ethnicities, or different accents, or different gender, or whatever. And I think once we start bringing in these voices, we have representation, and we have somebody saying, disagreeing with the views and saying, actually, this is not right, and this is, when it goes out, this is the impact it's going to have, and this is culturally inappropriate, or this is sexist, or this is racist, or it can be construed as that as well. So I think it's really important that while we talk about diversifying, we are not just ticking a box and saying, oh, we've got 50% men and 50% women. We have to make sure those people have the same opportunities, they feel included in the workplace, that they also feel like they have a voice, that they can say things that they don't agree with. And I think it's about giving a voice to everybody as well while we start diversifying. And so we need to focus on inclusivity, about how we include different kinds of voices and viewpoints in our organization. And I think the payoff is huge, because right now it's not just in terms of the business figures, because once we have diverse views, we can attract different kinds of clients, we can target different kinds of clients and customer, but that is just more representative of the society we live in, and it's the ethos and the values that we represent that attracts customers. I think that's really important for a work.
So it's kind of beaming out a kind of a model of how, once you challenge your own biases and thinking, having a quiet reflection of, okay, yes, that's true of me in my judgment of this group or this group or this group, then you can start saying, okay, I'm going to make a conscious decision about how we do this. As you say, then we start not having silos and echo chambers, but then we start weaving together a kind of a society that reflects the values of all of us rather than one particular group. Yeah. Okay.
And I think we need to be very active about it. And I think businesses and organizations and workplaces, it's not just enough to say we are inclusive or we are diverse. We have to be very active now, because unless we are actively countering some of the biases, the change is not going to happen. That's what I think.
Sure. So, and how do we act? What advice would you use? I know we've run out of time, but just before you go, what is the kind of, in terms of if people want ideas about how they can do that, to be active and to do something differently, what sort of things do you see your readers doing, your clients doing? What do you see? How do they do that in a practical, real way?
I think, as you said, weaving it is in the ethos and the policies of the workplace, so that it's coming from top down, that everybody is addressing it. And it doesn't seem like only the people who are in the minority are creating these equality committees and they are educating everybody. It actually, everybody is being an ally as well. I think that's really important, to be an ally, to be actively advocating for people who are in the minority and educating ourselves on the history and the legacy of oppression and why it is like that. And then we start questioning our privileges. I think that's a very uncomfortable position to be in, and say, what privileges do I carry that the other person doesn't have? And I always say, unconscious bias training, I give lots of talks and things, but nobody can cure you of unconscious biases. Through these talks, we can reflect and we can acknowledge, and then we can take concrete steps, but we can minimize these biases and we can minimize the impact of our biases. But nobody, and if somebody says that, that's just false. Nobody can cure anybody of unconscious biases. And I think we need to understand the outcome we want to have as well. I keep on saying that it shouldn't be a box ticking exercise, which a lot of workplaces sometimes do. And I think we really need to sit down and think about why we are doing it and what outcome we want to have out of this as well.
Yeah, it's based on a values-based decision. Well, I think one of the first things that we can do is buy your book, Sway, Unravelling Unconscious Bias. I think is a really great place to start. We're built on science. And thank you very much for writing it, and thank you very much for being with us today. I really appreciate it, Pragya.
Thank you so much for having me, Susie.
Yeah, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.